Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here on my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 1 Water, Episode 16, The Deserter. JM Animation is the animation studio for this episode, so the main studio. Overall, I think this is a pretty good episode. You know, I think it's one of those episodes where I think depending on the person, it's either like more in the kind of higher end of things within book one or potentially more into the lower end. I don't think many people just rate this as kind of like an average episode. I think it does tend to be one of those ones that kind of just goes either way. It's a fairly important episode because of, I suppose, the impact that it eventually has on Aang in like book 3. In addition to like some of the reveals that happen here, like Zhao obviously being revealed to be Jeong Jeong's student, Katara learning that she has healing abilities, as well as of course the Aang and his refusal to firebend ever again. I think the problem in a way with this episode is the title character Jeong Jeong, because while I like some of the stuff they add here, I feel the reappearances of Jeong Jeong don't. It's not like they don't fit in with his initial appearance. It's just like they don't reference like this episode itself all that much later on. He just comes back, is noted as like an old master. He's a member of the Order of the White Lotus, but that's it. Like there's no real like significance given to Jeong Jeong as like a character, and I think it's ultimately because Iroh basically fills in Jeong Jeong's role and is better than Jeong Jeong, because the only, I think, really unique thing about Jeong Jeong by the end of the series, compared to like Iroh, is that he has a really cool style of firebending, with the whole kind of focus on making walls of fire and having great control over these kind of huge structures of fire, which I suppose is one of the notable things about this episode in general, is that we see two characters use very unique styles of firebending, with the fire tamer magician guy at the start demonstrating a more, I suppose, artistic approach to firebending that we've never really seen before. Like Zuko uses fire whips, but the idea that this guy can basically control fire to the point where he can make a kind of whip-like thing, but then have it go from that kind of string of fire into just a dragon on the end, and really kind of make art out of the fire, was very unique to see. And then Jeong Jeong, of course, the firewall that he makes, very much, I think, being presented as like one of the most powerful pieces of firebending we've seen in the series up to now. It's just that I almost would have preferred it, like, did they actually have the idea for him to be a part of the Order of the White Lotus at this point in time? Because again, it's one of those situations where I feel like if Mike and Brian had the chance to redo this episode again, they would have had a stronger hint towards Order of the White Lotus than they kind of do right now. I think obviously the fact that he eventually does help the Avatar and does teach him and notes his power makes that clear. But I almost feel like Jeong Jeong's his relationship with firebending and his ability, in a way, makes you really think like, wait, does this guy and his view of firebending make him kind of worthy enough to be in the Order of the White Lotus? Because watching it again here, like, and it's something I always kind of note when I watch this episode, it's just like, he's very, very, like, over the top, like, fire is dangerous to an insane degree. Like, some of the things he says, you know, it's very kind of, you know, poetic, some of the stuff he says, but, like, he calls it a burning curse, at times, you know, that when you firebend, you have to walk a razor's edge. And I get that the episode is trying to make it clear that control is actually one of the key parts of firebending. That because the nature of the element means that compared to all of the other ones, you know, water will just kind of stay as it is. Of course, in nature, there can be times when water is very violent and aggressive, but for the most part, it's calm and soothing and just stays there. Earth, equally, until you do something to it, is steady and stays where it is. Wind obviously swirls around and stuff like that, but again, unless it's a natural disaster type thing, it's just wind that's calm until you actually apply bending to it. But with fire, his point is basically that you light a fire and leave it, it's going to burn anything around it that it can and eventually go out. And it's an inherently more dangerous element to bend than any other one, and it requires, of course, so much control from the user compared to the other ones. Because if you make a mistake with water bending, you just get a bit wet, unless you're, I suppose, maybe practicing for the first time some of those more ice type maneuvers, but he doesn't really go to depth there. So I at the same time get why he is so cautious in trying to make it clear to Aang. The lesson he's trying to impart on Aang is like, you need to have control and discipline before you go into Fire Blast, which is what Aang really wanted to do at the start of the training. But he is so... It comes across so much that he himself, Jeong Jeong, has an issue with firebending, that it comes across so clearly to his student that like the focus is so much on this discipline stuff that it really takes away a lot of the practical features of the training that I think is something Aang really needs. And I think it was a case of Jeong Jeong's ideals himself, him being kind of unable to really adapt everything to Aang as a student, and realize that like Aang will get that sort of stuff as a character later on, but you kind of do need to start him off with a little bit of action in a way to kind of get him really into it. And I think again, like keeping in mind that he is a member of the White Lotus, okay, I get he's more of a defensive firebender, but for someone to be in this position, it feels like, is Jeong Jeong aware of like the true way of firebending? And it feels like, in a way, for a firebender to be part of the Order of the White Lotus, you kind of have to be aware of that. And in a way, Jeong Jeong isn't, to a degree. Like, I don't think he knows the dragon's way of firebending. And he being aware that, like, it's alive, it's life. That, like, that's the way to look at it from a positive perspective. And it's not like he tells Aang that necessarily here. He very much emphasizes the fact that, yes, it's alive, but it's alive in a violent sense, rather than it being, like, light and heat and so on. So that's always a weird one. Just look at Jeong Jeong's dialogue, like in a kind of vacuum, and it's like, that's very over the top here. But I suppose you can understand why he is that way, given what happened with Zhao, and his view on firebending kind of being formed by that. But it's not a huge reveal, I suppose, about Zhao, in that ultimately it's just like, oh, Zhao being Jeong Jeong's students more actually informs stuff about Jeong Jeong than it really does Zhao. Because I think Zhao, you really look by the end of the season and it's like, Zhao is a powerful character because of the like military power he possesses, given his role in the Fire Nation military. He himself as a fighter, yes, he is able to ultimately perform very powerful firebending attacks, but he's nowhere near the discussion of like the most powerful firebender. Like, he really is nowhere near that discussion at all. You bring in all of the named firebenders that we have in the series, and I think he comes off very, very early on. It's only the absolute, I think, beginner firebender characters that you in any way would rate maybe below Zhao. He is not presented as being like amazingly powerful, in that Aang is able to just completely evade every attack he does, only getting extremely minor burns because he was kind of trying to prove a point to Zhao here. And Zuko would establishing that only days after starting advanced firebending training is able to defeat Zhao in combat as well, speaks to like, this guy isn't that great. So there's that as well. What else do we have here? We get stuff like the introduction of Che here as like the second deserter of the Fire Nation military, and they kind of established this here, that like the episode's called The Deserter because Jeong Jeong left the Fire Nation military, the first one to do so and still be alive. I almost feel like that should have been like bigger plot point. Like, maybe it wouldn't been, maybe it's not as interesting of a story as you'd think, but I'd like to know the details surrounding that. Like, what was the incident or what happened that really caused Jeong Jeong to just be like, do you know what? I have this high position in the Fire Nation military, but this is not what I want to do anymore. I feel there's an interesting backstory for him as well, that they could get into, and potentially involving Che as like the second deserter, and why he has such respect for Jeong Jeong. Plus these kind of weird tribal people that are around them that seem to like be like the tribe of Jeong Jeong is kind of weird. But you know, it is what it is. Uh, I suppose the Roku scene as well is actually important to talk about, where Jeong Jeong immediately is like, no, I'm not going to train Aang until he's learned all of the other elements, until he's mastered all of the elements that are more stable and soothing. That only then will he be able to actually learn the element that is not like that. And it takes basically Roku appearing kind of through Aang to Jeong Jeong to basically say, you know, are you calling the Avatar weak? I've mastered the element 1,000 times in 1,000 lifetimes. You will teach me. I feel Mike and Brian potentially would have wrote that line a little bit differently, given where things have gone since then. I get that to some degree. I don't really buy into this massively, that, you know, when he says 1,000 times and uses 1,000 both times, it's more trying to say lots and lots in a kind of more formal way than just kind of say, I did it loads of times and be more kind of epic and formal. But him literally saying 1,000 lifetimes and then them applying a timeline to the Avatar, how long it's existed, of 10,000 years, is just kind of like really basic math, guys. That makes the average age of the Avatar 10, which theoretically is possible, but we see the Hall of Avatars and pretty much know that most avatars lived into like adulthood and some stuff like that. So it's a weird one where like I think they would have worded this very, very differently if they had known exactly where they were going after this point. But you know, it's a good reason for why Aang does start his training here. And you know, we get some idea of like the differences in the element here, and that like Jeong Jeong brings up the idea of like the most powerful source of firebending is the sun, and it exists in balance with nature, and you have to have that balance too. He talks about how, you know, water is cool and soothing, earth is steady and stable, and fire is very different than that. And so that's why Jeong Jeong focuses initially on breathing technique, stance, getting the discipline in, and only then introducing the actual practical firebending. But of course, once he does introduce that stuff, it's when it goes out of control and Aang burns Katara. And this is what I brought up with the last review for Bottom of the Water Tribe, where this is 2 episodes in a row where Aang is in this position where he does something really wrong and is kind of, at least for a little bit, kind of like the villain for a little bit, of just like he's made a really bad mistake, and you know, Sokka is angry at him, Katara is upset, and all of this sort of stuff. I don't think it was a good idea to have these 2 episodes right next to each other. I think the placement of this episode is a lot better where it is, and as I said, Bato I think is the one that should have been placed earlier on in the season. But it's an interesting scene because it ultimately is given a huge importance within the series, that the reason Aang never attempts to learn firebending over the rest of the series until basically the last couple of episodes is because he hurt Katara, and because he cares about Katara so much, him having this moment where he hurt her using this technique is something he never wants to do again. So this is a very, very important scene that like informs very greatly, you know, Aang's one element for Aang, and one that's going to be a challenge for him. And it's obviously brought up in like the Guru as well, when it comes to you know, stuff that Aang refuses to do, and the requirement to like open one of the chakra points. But it also leads to a great moment for Katara, with her healing her hands after this, and Jeong Jeong being the one to clarify to her that, you know, some benders, water benders, can have this technique. Not everyone, but some do. It's a very powerful technique, and one that he wished he had that technique, the ability to heal, over the ability of firebending. Even though, as Katara points out, like, you're a master. Like, the things you can do with firebending, I could only ever like dream of achieving with like my waterbending. And he just kind of points out to her, like no, like the healing is a much better technique that I prefer to have than fire, because of what I'm required to like be or do as a firebender, having firebending. As I said, I think they could have maybe written some of the dialogue of Jeong Jeong being kind of like cautious about firebending a little bit better to understand his perspective a bit more. But it was a really good scene to get across, you know, that Katara has this new technique. that becomes very important, and it is an important one to give her leading up to the Water Tribe stuff, where they do go down this road of kind of the North saying women have to emphasize the healing aspect of waterbending, the men are going to do the fighting, and Katara actually learning both is a really, really cool thing to give her. And it's an important line as well, because Katara eventually, you know, by the end of the series, you would have to say is right there as like the first or second best waterbender in the entire series, with Paku. And, you know, she gets to the point where she is kind of Jeong Jeong level, but with waterbending. And so it's an interesting journey to see her here, where she doesn't in any way think of herself as like a master at all. But by the end of the series, she is pretty much the waterbending master. What else do we have? Zhao versus Aang, the actual fight itself, I actually really like the choreography, seeing a lot of Aang's dodging abilities with airbending really effectively used here. Because I think if there's any issue with some of the fights in Book 1, it's that Aang is meant to be a master airbender, and of course he's never meant to like overly attack back, but I often feel like they let aggressive characters take advantage of this a little bit too much. Whereas I feel the aim is almost that, like, no, Aang should be able to, like, dodge, like, non-master benders, like, almost, like, forever. And, like, it really requires something special from whoever he's facing to actually hit him. Whereas I think this fight actually gets that across quite well, where, like, Zhao is nowhere near hitting Aang in any of these scenes, because Aang is just so in control. No need to fight back, just use a little bit of airbending to assist his movement to dodge, and just lets Zhao destroy himself and everything around him. It's very impressive. But yeah, I think that's everything. I think if there's a weakness to this episode, it definitely is just that it just ends in mid-air. Like, Jeong Jeong kind of disappears back into the forest, they leave, you know, of course, Katara heals Aang's wounds here at the end, but it's just like, Jeong Jeong's gone. And I get, like, ultimately, like, it's Aang accepting that he's not going to firebend again, he's not going to learn from Jeong Jeong again, but it's a bit weird to just, like, Aang and Jeong Jeong's last meeting is so weird, and, like, we just kind of leave the episode at this point, and, like, Zhao is just left there, Aang has left. It's not an awful ending, but it's a bit like, I feel you should have done a little bit more to just wrap it up, given that, like, Jeong Jeong isn't going to come back for, like, ages in the series. But yeah, that's my thoughts on The Deserter. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode, how you feel about it, you really like this episode or not. As I said myself, I like some of the really important stuff that we get here. I think Jeong Jeong as a character is a bit of a kind of enigma as a character, in that he is an old master, but, like, his view of firebending is kind of also really weird, given that he's in the White Lotus. It feels like his view on firebending doesn't necessarily fit the Order massively, but I get, as, like, a firebender person who respects the Avatar and the other nations and knows a lot about that stuff, why he's in there. It's just, I feel there's something a little bit missing with Jeong Jeong. I'd like to know a little bit more about him. But yeah, that's the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.